Hey everyone, welcome to this month's podcast on training tips with Real Estate Closing Path. This podcast recording is the exclusive property of Real Estate Closing Path. This recording may be shared across all social media platforms, provided it includes a clear and direct link to our website, which is realestateclosingpath.org. And in case you're new here and not sure exactly who we are, allow me to introduce ourselves. We are Real Estate Closing Path, and we're the third branch in a suite of companies owned by one woman, Marianne Harris. She started in the industry 25 years ago with Positively Balanced, which provides third-party escrow account reconciliation services. And then in 2020, she launched Positively Closed, which provides remote closing support solutions. And then again, we are Real Estate Closing Path. We provide training in all aspects of the closing process. So that's what we do. And this slide also shows just a little bit more specifically what we do. Right now, we offer 9 different virtual training workshops that we run monthly. We can also customize any curriculum to provide maybe one-on-one or training for your office. We can offer any of these workshops as a lunch and learn. And then all of these workshops are accredited in both Georgia and Florida, and we are moving quickly to other states, so stay tuned. We also invite you to follow us across all the various social media platforms. We are on YouTube, LinkedIn, Facebook, TikTok, and Instagram, and wherever you like to network professionally. If you want to keep track of any other upcoming events, you're welcome to connect with us there. And allow me to introduce our illustrious team. We have 3 in our office who are joining us today, and starting with Sandy Donaldson. She is our expert point of view. She's been in the industry for 40 years, and she's worked with large and small firms and engaged in all aspects of the closing process. She is known for her wit and wisdom and has collaborated on all of the curriculum development and been the lead educator for all of our instruction since we started in 2021. So welcome, Sandy. Glad to have you here.
Thank you.
And then I am Janice Gaines. I kind of bring the outsider perspective to the conversation because I have never been a closer. In fact, my background is in education. I was a high school English teacher forever until I was brought on to help launch RECP. And I really enjoyed this role where I help to bring some structure around the curriculum development. I work on the accreditation, certainly hosting the monthly podcast, and then also networking with students and guest speakers and other leaders in the industry. It's been a great midlife career change for me. And then also welcome to Pierre Ballone-Glavin. She is our next generation perspective. She started as one of our students in our original training class way back in 2021. And then we sent her off to work in various closing positions in different firms within the local area. And then we brought her back to be an assistant trainer and also head of marketing for RECP. And she's done an amazing job. So Pierre, welcome. Glad you are here. All right, our topic today is on training tips. We thought we would dish a little bit on maybe some of our secret recipe and what we have discovered along the way that seems to work well when you are training someone in the industry. And this could be for someone who is brand new, or this could be for someone who maybe is switching roles. Maybe they've been a pre-closer and they're moving up to a closer, or maybe someone's switching software. Or we actually have a lot of attorneys who come to us and maybe they've been in immigration law and now they're wanting to add on real estate law. So we actually have just a wide variety of students who find their way to our training program. And we like to think that these training tips would help with anyone. And maybe we'll just touch briefly on why train, like why bother and why pay that much attention on the process that you are using to train people in your office. So we believe that investing in training brings a lot of value. It closes gaps for losses, meaning you're helping to solidify someone's knowledge base, and therein they can make fewer mistakes, which sometimes those mistakes can in fact be costly. So your bottom line is to increase your profit margins and overall to have a successful business. So one really does lead to the other. And we believe that investing in a little bit of training now on the front end can save you a lot of headache and hassle potentially down the road. So a little bit investment now to save a lot of potential time and money down the road. We think it's worth it. So, all right, on to our first tip. And I think this is a big one, when and where you can. We believe that it's important to add some humor. As the cartoon says here, I think the seller will accept your offer, but the homeowners association will never approve that shirt. Right? Sometimes it feels like an HOA can have a hand in every little thing going on in your property. So some humor can help to set the tone for a more friendly, approachable, relatable environment. It invites some active engagement. Someone's instantly going to share a story. Maybe they've got an HOA story to tell, and then your session or your meeting is often off and running. So again, it's important for people to feel at ease. They're comfortable. This is a personable training experience where they are going to be more apt to interact and to feel included, which is what you want. Anyone else have something they want to say about humor in training? Yeah, go ahead, Pierre.
I just want to say there are studies that show that when somebody is at ease, when somebody's in a more relaxed mindset, as opposed to being really stressed or intimidated by something, they retain more information. So when we start with humor and relax everybody in the room, we do an icebreaker, everybody gets to know each other a little bit. It helps diffuse that stress so that you can actually intake more information.
Yeah, that's so true. I appreciate you saying that. That there are scientific studies that just bring it up the stress factor, because a lot of people might feel embarrassed. They might be feeling intimidated. They might be feeling like, oh my goodness, there's so much to learn, and how am I ever going to know it all? So anything and everything you can do to try to put someone at ease from the beginning, it's to your advantage for everybody. It makes for a much better training environment. Thank you. All right, moving on. Pierre mentioned icebreakers, and we'll touch on that. I know this is already a pretty common thing that people will do, either in person or virtually. It does help people to feel seen and heard, particularly on our platform where we're training virtually. This can have kind of a double-edged sword, meaning there's more than one good reason to do this. Not only are you getting to know people and kind of bringing that personal aspect to the training, you can also be subtly testing the technology. And it's much easier to have a tech flub on something like, hey, tell us where you're from, or what's your favorite dessert, versus, oh my goodness, they've asked me a question on whether I know this X, Y, and Z topic, and now I just can't figure out how the buttons work. And so right away, you want to invite people to get comfortable with whatever the training platform is. Again, if you're virtual, make sure people know where the buttons are. Make sure their audio quality is working. Is it loud enough? Maybe they can hear, but they can't speak. Or maybe they can't figure out how the camera is working, but that's okay. And you can put them at ease right away. Or invite someone to share in the chat box. Maybe they're not comfortable taking the mic, or they've got background noise and kids are jumping around if they're working remote. Who knows? Could be dogs barking. So any and all of that we have seen in training platforms. And so just doing what you can to help people feel comfortable, to give them a minute to relax. Maybe a good way to see some of this, like the humor piece and even icebreakers, it's kind of like all the previews that you get to watch at a movie theater before the actual movie starts, right? You get in your seat, you're comfortable. Oops, do I need to run to the restroom, or do I want to move seats and get a little closer? Who knows? It just gives you time to be really centered, focused, and then ready for whatever might be next. Anyone else have something you want to add here before we move on? Yeah, Sandy.
Yeah. If we want our training to be interactive, which we do, right? So not only we make them feel comfortable and all that, but we get a sense of who they are.
Yes.
Are you an introvert, an extrovert? Are you going to type in the chat box? Are you going to speak? Are you going to laugh at jokes? Are you cut to the chase kind of folks? And so it sort of does, the content does not change.
Right.
But the presentation might be modified a little bit based on what we learned about who the participants are for that particular workshop.
Yeah, I really appreciate you saying that. I think that's so true. Right away, the instructor or whoever's leading the training session gets a sense of that person's personality. Hey, is this person a talker? Then they're going to talk more. Or, hey, is this person struggling with all the text? So I need to not ask them to push too many buttons right away. Or, is this person a slow learner? Or are they an auditory learner? Do they need me to repeat something 2 or 3 times? So again, you're right, that can very much change how you approach your training when you're the person in charge, when you're in the lead. Yeah. Well said.
To piggyback on that, we can take it a step further, even in the responses people are giving us. Something might seem unrelated completely. We ask people what they do in their free time, but if somebody tells us they love to play chess and do Sudoku, we're like, okay, you'd make a great closer. You love numbers and you're quite a animal figure. If somebody tells us they love to, I don't know, do art, painting in their free time, more creative outlets. So we can kind of pair them up with a position that might even match or give them advice in that direction.
That's true. That's true. If you're not a good people person, then maybe that pre-closer is not your lane. Maybe you're the post-closer. That's so true. So the more you understand the nuances of your industry, and then the more you begin to understand the nuances of people's personalities, then just it's going to be a better match overall. Thanks, Kim. All right, moving on. Another tip that we like to implement in our training is something called zoom out, zoom in, and zoom out. And if you can think of photography and like big picture, when you first are setting the scene or setting the stage, you want this big picture overview of the process. And here on the slide, if you're able to see, we have a picture of a map. And so we have a big map of the US, which provides context that's needed to then zoom in on a particular city or state. And we happen to be located in Georgia. So we have the state of Georgia here that's inset in another picture. If you didn't know where Georgia was, it can be very helpful to start with the US and trying to orient yourself on a map, right? That seems to be fairly common sense or common knowledge. That makes sense when we're looking at maps. Then we have found that it's important for people to have a map of sorts when they are approaching this industry and trying to understand the training. So if you can help someone to see the big picture and then zoom in on their specific role or task, it's going to help them to feel more confident. And then in the end, to kind of understand how what they're doing affects maybe other roles down the road. We do have a particular closing timeline graph that we share in our training. And so this timeline would show the big picture in a sense of sort of start to finish, not always just step 1, step 2, step 3, but essentially all of these roles or steps are going to be covered by the time you receive a contract till the time you hit the closing table. Well, again, if someone's new to the industry, they don't know all of this. They don't know the roles. They don't even know the terminology. They're still trying to learn the difference between what's a pre-closer and a closer, and they may not understand that there can be a world of difference between the two, especially if you're just starting out. So helping someone to see the big picture, then zero in on their lane. We do understand that in some offices, you've got one person doing all of these roles. Although, however, in larger firms, they're often segmented and maybe someone's pre-closer and someone else post-closer. But again, help someone see the big picture and then constantly be referring back to, okay, this is this piece. Remember when we were talking about this? This is going to happen first. Or no, you don't have to worry about that because someone else is going to, have that responsibility, whatever that may be for your firm. That is for each individual firm or office to input their unique protocols of who does what and when and what order, etc. If you're interested in receiving a copy of this timeline, I do want to give a quick shout out that we offer a copy of this for free if you head to www.realestateclosingpath.org, and on our homepage there's a place where you can access this free timeline graph, so feel free to use as you see fit. Anyone else want to chime in on this little tip?
Yeah, I would like to point out that, just like anything that we do in life, we want to have a purpose. So sometimes the big picture is the why. I'm learning how to do this one little thing. And if I'm, the on a automobile assembly line, for example, I'm putting in this one bolt and that's all I do all day, and it doesn't seem all that important. But if I see the end result and I see that if I hadn't done that correctly, the rear axle is going to fall off, And so similarly, when we look at all these different tasks, you learn to do one thing and it may not seem like a big deal. But when you zoom out and you see the whole big picture and you see what part that plays, then you begin to understand the importance of every piece of the puzzle.
Yep. So true. So you have new respect, new understanding. It helps you to be able maybe to support other coworkers, knowing what they're going through. And again, certain times of the month where closings can be more intense or a higher volume. And it just helps to know what every person is experiencing in each little step of that process. So good insight, Andy. Okay, we will move on. Another training tip that we implement is using metaphors and personal stories as much as possible. It helps to engage the learner. People tend to remember stories more than just facts and information. There's a saying that facts tell, but stories sell. And also, we tend to remember what we connect with more emotionally. So if you've got that story that's really embarrassing, or maybe it was a really big oops or a mistake, or maybe it was a really big win, something unique or unusual that you could share about your experience in the industry that could help someone else to remember either what to do or what not to do. And Sandy, I know you have a ton of stories, but there is one that I would love for you to share today, if you would. And it was about one of your early mistakes in the industry. Do you know which one I'm talking about?
The payoff, yeah.
Yeah. Tell that one real quick.
Yes. So I had been in the mortgage industry for quite some time and very familiar with that end. And then I moved over to the settlement side. And one of the very first transactions I did, I realized as I was dispersing the file, I had not added enough interest on the mortgage payoff. So we were short on the payoff. And so I was mortified. And I went to the attorney with my checkbook and I said, I will pay it this because it was my mistake. And he said, you won't pay it because it's a cost of doing business, but you will never make that mistake again. And I did not. I learned not to put my hand on the stove because it was going to burn, right? So people like to hear that kind of stuff because sometimes we're talking to people who don't come from anything connected to our industry. So we're trying to help them see themselves being able to do this. And they look at us as the professionals, which we say that tongue in cheek because we know how we're just winging it a lot of the time. But they need to see us as fallible people, and that we're just like them, and we make mistakes and we learn. And then I can confidently say, that was 25 years ago and I've never done it again. So it helps them realize, first of all, that everybody makes mistakes, that every mistake can be fixed, and that they can do it.
Yeah. That's so good. I always appreciate you sharing that story. And again, if we had time, I'd let you share 1,000 wins that I know you had on top of that. But it's so true that we're all human. Everyone makes mistakes. And so it helps to hear that that's relatable and it's okay. It's fixable. And again, hopefully everyone's boss will be as, understanding as Bruce was in that moment, because I know it made a big difference. Right, we don't want to scare people away, right? We want them to feel confident, and it's okay. There's always going to be a learning curve, just before anyone learns to walk or run, a toddler's going to fall down a few times. And so it's important, if you are on the, management side of things, that there's some grace and patience with the process as people are learning, whatever that role may be in your office. All right, moving on. So piggybacking on the metaphor piece, I love this one, being the former English teacher. So this one's especially my wheelhouse. But a metaphor can be very powerful in training. It helps to build a bridge between something you do know and something you don't know. So for example, if I said, my best friend's life is a real Cinderella story. You don't know my best friend, but you do know the Cinderella story. So you can make some instant connections and assumptions based on that metaphor. So if you can find ways to do that in training, you're going to help to onboard or advance someone's skills that much more quickly. So one of our favorites that we start with in our very first training workshop, we use a car analogy. We say we teach people how to drive, but each car is a little bit different. So what does that mean? That means we teach the fundamentals, just the basics, before we deep dive into anything specific like software or state protocols or understanding whatever the unique procedures might be in any particular office. So if you can compare that to driving, if you understand how to drive, you understand the rules of the road, so to speak, then you can step into just about any car and figure it out, right? If you owned a car, but then maybe had a rental car that was very different, they're all going to have the same bells and whistles for the most part, but they're going to be in a different place, right? How it fits and which button and where it is it on the left side or the right side or the door or the console, or certainly with new technology being added to certain cars, etc. There can be little small shorter learning curves no matter what car you drive. And so we like to say that's going to be true no matter what person is placed in any office, right? We can teach them how to drive. We can teach them the fundamentals of the closing process from start to finish, but there will always be a little piece of mentoring that's going to be needed in that unique environment, whatever that might be. So we come back to this car analogy time and time again, and we encourage you to use it if you find it helpful. Anyone else want to add on to this one?
I think RamQuest is manual. Or
Gotcha.
if you're doing your own in-house title searches, maybe that's manual transmission.
Yep. That's hilarious. Yeah, there's definitely cars that are, a Lexus versus, a Pinto or whatever the difference may be. There's Dream Car and Dream Software out there, and then you've got your old school and as well. So,
But also, one of our icebreaker questions is, what is your dream car, right?
Yes.
And so when somebody says, what is their dream car, and it's Lamborghini, they're not sitting around going, gosh, I hope I can drive that, because they know how to drive.
That's right.
And so it gives some confidence in the beginning, because you know how to drive, and the details you can figure out. When you get in the car, they're going to say, okay, here's how you do this, here's how you do that. But we don't choose what car we're going to buy next based on how hard it's going to be to figure out, because we know we can figure it out.
Yeah, that's true. And sometimes it does just come down to preference. Some people literally prefer stick shift, and some people literally prefer automatic. And it's just, what's your preference? And so all of that can be learned given some time and opportunity. And we can also sometimes assist with training where it's needed if we know what software platforms people are working with. we can adjust or apply our training to whatever the needs might be in any unique location. So it's a good analogy. All right, moving on. Another analogy that we use to help someone understand, particularly a pre-closer role. Imagine that a pre-closer is like the hub at the center of a wheel. You are at the center of a lot of moving parts. And if you can imagine the different spokes in a wheel representing all the different people that you might have to reach out to, it could be an attorney, a lender, a realtor, a buyer, a seller, a HOA president, et cetera, right? That's a lot. That's a lot of moving parts. That's a lot of communication that needs to happen to get that file rolling towards the closing table in a timely manner. So it's not something to be taken lightly. And again, for those who are training a new pre-closer, there's a lot of skill and talent to keep all those spokes rolling in the right direction in a timely manner, for sure. Right, another analogy. If you are sports minded, we like to use this football analogy, especially when it's football season. We teach that a pre-closer is a lot like a quarterback. Again, a very important position on the field. They are the first ones to get the snap of the ball, right? They get it first, like a file opener or pre-closer. And then they get to take a few steps back and look at the big picture. What's at play here? What's at play in this file? Where do I need to go next? Who's going to be my next phone call, my next email? And that might change per file, just like for the quarterback on the field. That's going to change per snap. The strategy changes depending on how close you are to the goal, or is it first, second, or third down? Whatever that may be, it's going to change how you approach what's going to happen in that particular file. So I hope that analogy makes sense. And again, quarterback, super important position and not to be taken lightly. So we really want pre-closers to be seen with that same respect. So, anyone else want to tag on here with this analogy? No. So I have maybe one more thing I'll add here, just about being a team player, that it's never just one person, but maybe back to that concept of, understanding your role, but then understand how it fits together with everybody on the team who's working together towards that same goal of making a great closing experience happen. So it's never just one person. There might be an MVP that stands out in a game. That's great, but it's never just one person. It takes everyone doing their part to be successful. Did you want to say something, Sandy?
I was just going to say, because that is a sports analogy, different ones appeal to different people, to different types of people. So somebody might see themselves in this that didn't see themselves in the wheel necessarily, So it's always good to have a variety of things, so that you're reaching a variety of people.
Yep. So true. I appreciate you saying that, because there's not just one pathway to the brain or not just one pathway for learning. It can take several different examples and analogies. In fact, I always like to throw in that we learn best by repetition. How did we all learn our ABCs? Well, we sang an alphabet song 1,000 times, right? And we still use it. And that's how people learn the order of the alphabet. And then when you're in kindergarten learning how to spell your name, now you can look at the alphabet and start to pick out your name and why that matters to you. And then you get more adept at spelling and constructing sentences and so on, right? There's that process. So same thing with any learning, there's a curve, and we learn best by repetition and more than one example, more than one pathway. Good. Right, another example that we use, we say that the title of a property is a lot like a history book. Sandy, would you explain this one?
Sure. When we're talking about, well, in our industry, the word title means lots of things. But for our settlement purposes, we're talking about the ownership history of the property. And so, that appeals to me because I'm a history buff and I want to know, who owned it and what did they do with it and what were the liens against it, and you know, all of the stuff about that. And I always tell at this point that like most people, when they're embarking on a new relationship, they might stalk that person on social media, right? Well, um, I knew my husband in high school, and then we went our separate ways, and we didn't see each other for 35 years. When we reconnected, he told me where he had been living and where he had owned a house and all of that. And so, unlike normal people that go to social media, I went to the state deed index and searched the title records to see if he actually did indeed own a house where he told me he did.
Yep.
And he did. But so we can learn a lot when we receive a title search back. We can look at it and see that, oh, wait, husband and wife are on title. Now she's gone. Now some other woman's on title. Or he's gone and now she's on it by herself. Or wait, he added his mom. We learn a
Yeah.
lot. It's sort of like a
Yes.
soap opera.
Yeah.
But so it's if we can get people engaged in that way, in that the title examination is not just boring minutia of details, but it's interesting history. And
Yes.
so we try to get them engaged that way.
Yes. So true. Lots of truth telling in
Mhm.
title, as it were. So true. Great explanation. Moving on to another training tip. So this one says to use mnemonic devices. And so one that we've used in the past, to literally take your hand and form an O and teach someone that an owner's title policy is optional. Again, while it might be highly, highly recommended, right? But at the end of the day, optional. So again, just another way to create another pathway to the brain. Some people are what they call kinesthetic learners, which is more hands-on versus just visual or auditory learners. So anything we can do to get them participating and interacting instead of just sitting and listening, then you're going to have more engagement and more success. All right, next slide. This one's always a fun one. It kind of piggybacks on to storytelling. Anytime you can use cultural references that pick up on a popular song, movie, a TV reference, that's going to make it more entertaining and more memorable. Sandy is really a pro at this. She has some great teachable moments that she's been able to pull out from some classic films. And Sandy, would you share for a minute what's the Pirates of the Caribbean reference?
Yeah. Um, and we do this at the very, very beginning if we go back to that closing timeline,
Mhm.
and because I always say I'm very left-brained, I like things in order. I want one, two, three, four, I want a list for everything. And there is a point in the very first Pirates of the Caribbean movie where the pirates are speaking with the pirate Captain Barbossa about the pirate rules. And he says, well, they're more like guidelines than actual rules. And while we are governed in our industry by state regulations, by RESPA, federal regulations, a lot of the things on our timeline um, are suggestions. Like this is in a perfect world, this is how we wish it would go. But largely what we do is nonlinear. It doesn't happen that way. So this is the guideline how we'd like to keep the train on the rails, right? But it doesn't always turn out that way. It doesn't always work that way in order. Clearly, some things have to happen before other things. I mean, you have to close before you can disperse. But there are some things that, they come back. We order documentation, it comes back out of order, that kind of thing. And so we sort of have to adjust to that and realize that as long as we end up with the final product being correct, the order of things before that doesn't really matter. But it helps us to think, we say there's 100 ways to be right, right? And so there's lots of ways it can happen and still be within the guidelines.
Sure, that's good. That's a good reminder. And what about the Apollo 13 movie reference? What's that about?
Well, they, when they're trapped in space, um, there is a point where they're trying to improvise a landing procedure. And so they're, Houston is telling them what to do, and they're worried. The astronauts are worried that what about what's going to come next? How are we going to get through the atmosphere? How are we going to do this? And finally, Jim Lovell, who is the captain of the mission, says, "You are worrying about step number 843, and we are on number 6."
Yeah.
And sometimes it feels that way for us. There are
Yeah.
so many moving parts, and we're worrying about the thing down the road. And we do have to be thinking about that because we talk about being proactive, but we also can't lose our focus on what's happening right now because this thing has to be done. So we sort of have to be able to triage, and figure out what's the priority right now.
Yeah, I appreciate that because that even comes up in training sometimes where we'll have students who want to ask questions that are about something that's going to be in another workshop tomorrow, and if they can just hold on, focus on this piece now and trust that we'll get there, right? You can't learn it all in one day, sometimes it's spread out over
Right.
time. And so that's a good thing to remember. And what about the Karate Kid reference?
And again, this movie is so old, but now they've come back around.
True.
And we talk about, as we're going through and somebody teaches you how to do a certain task. And then when they pull back to the big picture and you see what that task does in the big scheme of things, I say it's a very wax on, wax off process. You were learning something that you didn't even know you were learning.
Yeah.
You were filling a piece of the puzzle that you didn't even realize was important, and
Right.
now you do. So it happens a lot. That's very
Yeah.
applicable to life, isn't it? We learn things that we didn't even know we were learning.
Yes, so true. And it's really, again, by repetition, it's creating a sort of muscle memory. You think of muscle memory in the gym or with, certain military skill or technique, but even just mental muscle memory that your brain's remembering certain procedures for whatever task you are working on. So that's wax on, wax off is a good reference for sure.
It's so cool to have like varied and just a lot of different analogies so that when you're connecting with somebody new and you see how it can relate to them, it clicks immediately. Like I was training with somebody once at a previous job, and we would send like memes back to and forth to each other relating to different areas of the closing process because we found them funny and we're both around the same age. So it was something that we could connect on that made the work make sense. Or we would talk about how it was kind of like a video game in some aspects. So, that would relate to a younger audience or maybe more male audience, and just like thinking about who the person you're training, how they will receive the information and what is going to click for them.
Yep, that's excellent. I appreciate you adding that. Or they might have another book or movie where they get the light bulb moment, like, oh, that reminds me of this. Maybe they haven't seen Karate Kid, but maybe they've seen something else, and all of a sudden it makes sense. So
Again, another purpose for our icebreakers, right? Because we learned something about them that we might can include down the road.
True.
100%.
Making it personal. Yeah. Go ahead.
Oh, just that 100%. I completely agree.
Yeah, agree. Good. All right, good job. So our final teaching tip today is to play games and offer incentives wherever it's possible. These could be games that you could create on your own, or certainly there are some out there that you could probably purchase. We use an online platform called Kahoot, which is an online trivia software where you can go in and just create true, false, or multiple choice, kind of create your own quiz questions. And this could be something funny or serious. You could even create a quiz around icebreaker answers to see who is listening well. Who knows? We've done this at Lunch and Learns. We do this at the end of every workshop. And again, not just to have some fun and some friendly competition, and it does become that, especially if we have a team and we've got 10 people from one office and they love to compete to see who's going to get that top spot. But this also serves a dual purpose of preparing someone to take a quiz. We do offer quizzes legitimate quizzes at the end of all of our training. And so a Kahoot is kind of a fun way to practice and review, and then also not to feel too bad if they make a mistake because it quote unquote doesn't officially count. And then it also provides a good moment to have some review. You know, if our team does need to stop and pause and reiterate a piece of information, we're happy to do that. We've seen training games around Family Feud or Jeopardy, even creating something like crossword puzzles or word searches. You'd be surprised at how much that could do to help someone learn the vocabulary or acronyms in the industry. And we've created a good bit of content around that as well. That's important to fill in all of these various roles. There's a lot of alphabet soup to learn and to process in the title industry. And Shane, I'm going to let you take lead here. What is this slide all about?
Way back in the 70s, there was a country singer named Charlie Pride. He's still alive, but he had a song that said, all I have to offer you is me. And basically, this is what differentiates our office or firm from every other office. You know, as we're driving along, and we see these shopping centers, they all have, you know, a dry cleaners, a UPS store, a Chinese restaurant, a nail salon. You know, there's so many, they're very similar. So why are we going to go to one rather than the other? And almost always it's because of service. You know, I've recently moved, and the same person had been doing my nails for 25 years. And so now I'm 50 miles away. So I have to find, so I've been to 5 nail salons looking for that same level of service, which I'm probably not going to find.
Oh,
But the thing that we have to understand is that we being the folks in our office are what bring people into our office. They are driven there by realtors, by lenders, you know, all of that. But we sustain the business. Your employees can um, retain that business or run them off. And so, if we want to train people in such a way that they're going to they're going to capture business for us, we want that. I mean, clearly everybody in the office is a rainmaker because everybody has a role, and if any one of those roles gives somebody a bad impression, they won't want to come back there again. The realtors won't want to send business. So we have to teach people that while the mechanics of what we do are important, we have to do things correctly and completely, and we have to comply with regulations and laws and, you know, all of that. But we can teach that stuff to literally anybody. But it's much harder to teach people to get along with people, to be the person that people want to spend time with, that people want to bring their business to. And so, you know, in the end, that's what we're doing. We're teaching our people to be accurate and thorough and kind and warm and welcoming, you know, so that we have all the parts of the puzzle. We just need to remember that the mechanics of what we do is not all we do, that this customer service part is a big piece of the puzzle.
yeah. So true and so well said. And I think professionalism and customer service are worth its own level of training. And so I'm sure we'll circle back to that in a future podcast. And I really appreciate you sharing this. So important to be mindful, you know, at the end of the day, you know, how you treat people matters. There's that famous Maya Angelou quote that, you know, people may not remember what you said or what you did, but they'll always remember how you made them feel. And so at the end of the day, that's true not only for clients that you're servicing, but also the employees that are in office that you might be training. So we hope we've been able to give you some valuable tips today that will help you implement better training in your location. And if you would prefer to outsource that piece of the process, we would love to assist you. Again, I'll put up a slide that shows all the different training workshops that we can offer. Please reach out. You can find us on social media or on our website, realestateclosingpathagain.org. Anyone with final comment before we wrap up? All right, thanks for listening, and we will see you again next time on RECP Radio. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you.